What I would like to do, Ray, if it's all right with you, is just start at start a little bit with your youth. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Covington, Kentucky.
Oh, I know Covington, Kentucky. Actually, that's a small world. Um, and did you grow up in a military family?
Did not, did not. Uh, Basically, I was an only child, and uh, just I like to think I had a normal uh, growing up experience, and went to after high school graduation. I went to Eastern Kentucky, then State College, now Eastern Kentucky University, and ROTC was a mandatory thing for all males at that time.
What year are
The
we talking about,
draft
Ray?
date. Uh, Fall of '59 is when I entered Eastern, and um, academically, I had to. They didn't do mid-year graduation, so and I had to have a couple more credit hours. So basically, I'm class of '64, uh, but finished up in January of '73, or excuse me,
63.
January of '64, end of January.
Okay. So what did you study? What was your degree in?
Art and a minor in commerce.
Major in art, minor in commerce. So it's yeah. Okay. So you said it's January 63. You said ROTC was a mandatory.
No, actually, January of '64.
Hmm. Okay. And you said ROTC had been mandatory for you?
It was a 2 year mandatory for all males that uh, were subject to the draft.
Hmm. Okay. So once you got out, what was your next step?
I had been working for a local photographer in Richmond, Kentucky, and worked with him until I went on active duty the 4th of April of '64. It reported to Fort Benning to the Infantry Officer Basic Course. Uh, Upon completion of that, I was assigned to the 2nd Infantry Division and further reassigned to C Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Infantry. Then, of course, all the redesignations took place the following June of '65. And then I deployed with the 1st Cav as a rifle platoon leader in August of '65, went over by ship, and we landed at Quignon mid-September. Uh, I stayed with the unit C Company until probably mid-June of '66. And then I was reassigned as the exec of A Company. Then towards the end of June, I came down with malaria and wound up in the hospital, basically at Long Bend, recovering from malaria. Then was reassigned, of course, back to Fort Benning, where I was assigned to the infantry school, primarily in platoon tactics committee, and was involved in teaching uh, officer basic and NCOIC and uh, programs. Then in approximately March, I was reassigned to the 1st Brigade of the 5th Infantry Division at Carson. And I was in the process of transferring out of the infantry into the Adjutant General Corps. Uh, as I'd already had a tour of the AG branch, determined that I should stay at Carson to get branch qualified as an adjutant general officer. I was supposed to go to work for the adjutant general in the personnel service division, but I wound up being assigned as a plans officer in the G1 office. Did that for about a year and a few months.
And where in the world are we? Where's Carson?
Fort Carson, Colorado, at Colorado Springs.
Okay.
And then I went to the Adjutant General Officers Advanced Course at Fort Bend Harrison. And from there, I was supposed to go back to the CAV as the Chief of Personnel Services Division. When I arrived in country at the 90th Replacement Battalion, I was told my orders had been changed, and I was sent to Cam Ranh Bay to be the company commander of the 544th Replacement Company. And it was approximately 20 February of 1970. I stayed at Cam Ranh approximately 2 or 3 months, and then and because I was on the promotion list, major, I was actually overgrade for the assignment. So I was then reassigned to Saigon Support Command, who further sent me to 29th General Support Group, and I became the group adjutant. And stayed there until February of 71. And then I went back to the States and was assigned to the Armed Forces Examining and Entrance Station, Detroit, Michigan. And I was there about 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days. And that was, of course, from 71 to 74. Then I was reassigned to Frankfurt, Germany. And my initial assignment was as the alcohol drug control officer of Frankfurt Military Community. We had 5 counseling centers dealing with drug and alcohol rehabilitation. And I served as principal staff advisor to any commands that were located within the Frankfurt Military Community. Did that for approximately a year. Served a short time as the community adjutant, and then was reassigned to the Assistant Chief of Staff Personnel for the 3rd Support Command. Upon finishing that assignment, I was then sent back to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and I taught personnel and management subjects at the Ordnance School. And then, of course, subsequently, I was released from active duty, and basically that was the end of my military career.
You know, my dad taught at Aberdeen Proving Ground at around the same time that you were there. I would say.
Really?
Yeah. He was an enlisted guy, though. He was in the Ordnance School. He taught heavy equipment maintenance.
Okay.
Aberdeen Proving Ground. I'm going to say probably 70, 72, 73-ish, somewhere around there.
Oh, no. 72, 73, I would have been in Detroit, so I would have missed him.
I see. Well, okay. So let me go back and ask a few clarifying questions, if I may. So you said that you finished in January. You finished college in January of 59 or 60, and
64.
Sorry, 64. That's right. And then in April, you went on active duty.
Correct.
Was that voluntary? Were you commissioned? Because you said ROTC was only
Yes,
mandatory
yes,
for 2 years.
yes. I was commissioned in the Army Reserve, and I was a reserve officer on extended active duty.
Gotcha. Okay. So even though ROTC was only mandatory for 2 years, it sounds like you did the full 4.
Yeah, I was at the end of my first 2 years. I was offered the opportunity to go into the advanced program, and subsequently was commissioned in the Army Reserve.
Okay. Okay. So 64, let's see, April of 64. What I can try to remember when exactly was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. What month?
The Gulf of Tonkin was August 5th, 1964.
Yeah. So
At
you
that,
you went on to active duty just a few months before that.
I'm sorry, yeah, 64. That's correct. And when I reported to my company in approximately 9-10 June, we went immediately to the field. And while I was in the field, after about a week, I got a call to report to the company commander. And he told me that I'd been selected to attend a school at Fort Gordon, Georgia called Civil Affairs. But actually, the course was civic action. Unbeknownst to me at the time, the battalion was required to have one officer trained in civic action. And I think it wound up I was the most expendable officer at the time, being I was one of the newest officers assigned to the battalion. That was a 6-week course. And when I arrived at Fort Gordon, where the Civil Affairs School was at, I was told I was probably in the wrong place because they didn't get second lieutenants in that school. I had arrived late in the evening and got into a discussion with the staff sergeant that I was reporting into, and he told me to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning. They get it all straight. I was at the right place at the right time, and found out later I was the second lowest ranking officer in the class. Everybody else were senior lieutenants, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels headed for military assistance assignments or embassies. The course was really fascinating in that it basically taught you how to deal with and run third world countries. So, with that knowledge, after I returned back to my company, mid-November, I understood there was a mission going on in the Congo, and told my company commander, "Oh, you need to send me. I know all about third world countries now." So in the following February, I took a rifle platoon to the Congo, and we guarded C-130 aircraft. I had anytime a flight left Leopoldville into the interior, I had to put 4 armed guards on the aircraft. And when it went into the jungle strips to unload supplies or pick up whatever needed to be picked up, my riflemen would go fore and aft in each wingtip. And one day I began to wonder, because the engines on the aircraft were never shut down, and they all had jet assist takeoff to get out of those small jungle strips. I went to the J3 and asked him, "How do my guys get back on that airplane in the event something happens?" And he politely explained, "Lieutenant, we'll keep the ramp down till we get airborne." I was very satisfied with that explanation until I got a little smarter and educated on things and realized my guys were not going to get on the aircraft. They were expendable. The aircraft was not. Anyway, when I returned back to the States in in April of '65, then the elements of the Second Infantry Division periodically were going to main post and secure classrooms and doing map studies of the Central Highlands. Never registered what was going on.
The Central Highlands of Vietnam.
The Central Highlands, yes, of South Vietnam. And then, of course, when Lyndon Johnson announced in July about sending the first cab to Vietnam, it then became apparent why we had been doing map studies. And of course, the rest is history.
Yeah. So when exactly did you deploy to Vietnam for your first tour?
We left Fort Benning on the 15th of August of '65. This is the main party. There were, I'm trying to remember, I think there were 5 ships that basically went out of various ports in the southeast part of the United States. And then we arrived, and we, being the division, arrived in and around Queen Yan Harbor about the 12th to the 15th of September of '65. And we, of course, left the ship, went to the shore. They put us on choppers and flew us up into An Cay, which at that time was just pretty much a big open fields. And it was extremely confusing because we had no idea what was going on and where we were going and what we were going to do when we got there. And by late that afternoon, the battalion had all gathered together. We broke down into companies and formed up and given the command to pitch shelter halves, and very, very, very confusing. A lot of the old NCOs who had previous combat experience were very befuddled with what was going on. Of course, you had about 16,000 troops. Many of them had no experience, and of course, that first night was very restless. And, it was difficult to try to keep everybody from firing off weapons and so on. But over a couple of weeks' time, everybody got acclimated and calmed down, and we began operations. And the rest of it kind of became history.
Well, I don't want to gloss over that. I mean, we're coming up on Battle of the Ia Drang Valley.
Yeah, that the 2nd Battalion, 12th Cav, contrary to the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and no discredit to those guys, but the 2nd Battalion, 12th Cav were really the first units into the Ia Drang. Professor out of Florida, the name escapes me, wrote a book called Death in the Highlands, I believe is the correct title. And he talks about the siege of the Special Forces camp at Play Me. the two corps commander, the Vietnamese commander, had committed most of his forces into trying to relieve the pressure on Play B. General Kennard, the division commander of the First Cav, lobbied, I believe it was General Larson, who was then the equivalent of a corps commander, to allow Task Force Ingram, which was basically the second of the 12th, to go relieve a crack Vietnamese unit that was guarding Camp Holloway. We flew in and secured the Camp Holloway, the Arvin forces, and I believe it was a Ranger unit, of course, went on in to Play Me. The next morning, it was determined that they would detach our assigned artillery to begin to do fire missions into Play Me. And then the second of the 12th was ordered to go in and secure an area for the artillery to come in and establish firing positions. That was approximately the 21st of October of 65.
You said you were a rifle platoon leader at this time.
Correct. The 7th Cav, that action was actually mid-November. And by that time, the entire division was pretty much engaged in and around the Ia Drang Valley.
Right.
And so, like I say, almost every unit within the 1st Cav division played some role. Contrary to a lot of people believing that only the 1st Battalion, 7th Cav was in there, that they actually had elements of the 2nd of the 7th and 1st Battalion of the 5th Cav. A few days later, after the battle at X-Ray, was the battle at LZ Albany, which was a much worse casualty situation. The majority of the 2nd and the 7th had a tremendous amount of their people killed, wounded. A fellow by the name of Bud Alley, who was the signal officer of the 2nd and the 7th, has written a great book called Ghost of the Green Grass and talks about the battle at LZ Albany, which was, to say, a horror show. And if people have not read that book or read about those battles, they need to. It's pretty brutal.
Forgive me, what do you remember about your experience in mid-November of 65?
Well, we came in, the Charlie Company, we came in on the tail end into the area where the battle had taken place at X-Ray. And I guess one of the heartburns I have with the movie is there's a scene where the North Vietnamese general is standing there with a stack of bodies, and he gives this big soliloquy. Actually, my unit was involved in policing up those bodies, and there were bulldozers airlifted in. We dug mass graves, and the bodies were buried in after that battle. So that was a Hollywood scene, I guess is most polite way I can say of that soliloquy, because like I said, it was policed up, and all loose weapons were picked up and taken care of, uh, and all the bodies were, the Vietnamese bodies were buried. The Americans, of course, were evac out for proper burial and so on.
This was the first time you'd seen anything like that.
Say again?
This was the first time you had seen anything like that.
Not necessarily, but on that scale, yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you felt about your I don't know, your decision to, to commit to a career in the military at that point.
Well, I'll never forget my company commander when, after Johnson had announced, the whole unit was gathered in the day room around a black and white TV. And, today I've ordered the first cab to Vietnam. Company commander was William O. Childs. And after the broadcast, he assembled the company outside the day room, and some of the young men were very distraught, but his words still resonate. He said, "Gentlemen, when you take a job as a chicken coop scraper, at some point you're going to have to get in and scrape the coop." And that was his way of saying, you're infantrymen and you're going to have to do your job. Uh, and those words have stuck with me. But uh, as far as making a decision, I mean, I thought about it, but for the most part, it afforded me opportunities for education and a retirement and just various things. So it made sense.
Yeah. You said you were an only child. Are you at this point, are you keeping in regular contact with your parents back in Kentucky?
Uh, they're both deceased.
Oh, I mean in the fall of 65.
Yeah, yeah. We corresponded uh, on a pretty regular basis. Of course, I had married and uh, corresponded with my wife, and then
Oh, you were married at the
ultimately,
time.
yes, I was.
Oh, I didn't know that. So sometime in between graduating from college and going on active duty, did you get married during that interval?
Well, the no, I got married actually after I was on active duty. Got married on Labor Day, or the 5th of September of 1964, to a young lady from Middlesboro, Kentucky, that I had met at Eastern.
Gotcha. Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to get at, and maybe, maybe there's nothing there, but I just have this impression, right? That battle of the Ia Drang Valley was the first time that a lot of soldiers probably got a real up close look at the resolve of the enemy, right? I don't know that anybody expected it to be that hard.
Well, actually, I mean, we had run into small units in various skirmishes, but the the siege at Playmee drew basically that was the first engagement of a large scale, basically involving an entire division at one time, in my opinion. There may be other people that disagree with me. There were battles, and if you go back, there were all kinds of activity, and but the and the concept of air mobility was a very new idea and concept. General Kennard was one of the premier proponents of it. And air mobility was thought of in the early '60s. The Howze Board, which was named after General Howze, who was the 3-star Corps commander at 18th Airborne Corps. I remember in '62, I was at ROTC summer camp, and we got to see a dress rehearsal that we were going to give to the Secretary of the Army the following day of this air mobility concept. And, it was pretty interesting, pretty amazing. Of course, as a young ROTC cadet, we really probably didn't have a clue as to how deep or how wide this idea was going to be developed. Of course, the test of the air mobility occurred. The big test was September of '65 through November of '65. There's a lot of interesting information involved with that in the development of the tactics and so on. And there was a lot of learn as you go as once we arrived in Vietnam. Just a lot of it was learned on the fly. But the Ia Drang, again, was probably one of the first and foremost large battles that occurred. There were a lot of scrimmages. The other thing is that we actually ran against regular North Vietnamese units. That was something that had not really occurred as best I remember.
So you said your first tour was ended by malaria.
Well, actually, I'd served my 365 days.
Oh,
but,
you did? Okay.
But the malaria was at the tail end of it.
Okay, so you did a full year.
Correct.
Got malaria. And when you came home, I'm sorry, I believe that's when you said you went to Fort Gordon?
No, I was reassigned to the infantry school at Fort Benning.
Benning. Okay. As an instructor?
Correct.
And what were the circumstances of your return to Vietnam for a second tour?
I was sent back as I was originally supposed to go back to the first cab to the Adjutant General office in the Personnel Service Division, Chief of Personnel Services Division. But the assignment was changed for whatever reason. And I wound up at Cam Ranh. I got assigned as the company commander of the 544th Replacement Company.
Yeah, so that I'd like to spend some time on this part of your story. The first time you went to Vietnam, you went as part of a unit that moved
Cor-
en masse to Vietnam.
Correct.
By this point in the war, guys are not coming in units anymore. They're coming in as individuals.
That is correct.
Your job is to process your unit's job now at the replacement company is to process those individuals.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Yeah, into the theater of war, essentially. Can you talk a little bit about what that job entailed? What was your sort of day-to-day experience, and did it strike you at the time that these guys were having an entirely different entry into the theater of war than you had?
Well, basically, once the deployment of major units, had to be by sea, by ships, because of the large amount of personnel that were being moved and the need for various units. By mid 66, 67, there became the need for individual replacements because a tour of duty was 365 days, as opposed to Korea, of course, World War II. When you went in, you were there for the duration. But they had established, they being the Department of Defense, Department of the Army, that you would only do a 1-year tour. So thus the need for individual replacement. Now, in previous situations, personnel were moved by boat because that was the largest, the quickest and easiest way to move people. But with basically saying is that it, because of the lack of air superiority by the enemy, then it became feasible to introduce replacements in via air. And there were charter aircraft, usually DC-8s, stretch 8s, and those aircraft could handle anywhere from 204 to 210 or 12 passengers. Yeah, there were basically 2 entries for Army forces into South Vietnam. One was in the Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, where the 90th Replacement Battalion originated. In the early days of the war, it was Camp Alpha and later redesignated 90th Replacement. And Cam Ranh Air Force Base became available, and thus the need for the 22nd Replacement was established there. So there were 2 ports of entry via air at that point. The 22nd Replacement Battalion was located in the Cam Ranh Bay area. And flight schedules were maintained, and most of our planes incoming were coming in from Fort Lewis, Seattle, Washington area. And we would get anywhere from 3 to 8 aircraft a day. Now, the battalion, the 22nd Replacement Company, or 22nd Replacement Battalion, basically had several companies. The 544th processed all E1 through E6 incoming in the country. There was another replacement company, and they processed all E1 through E6 outgoing or returning back to the States. There was a third company that handled nothing but R&R, in country and out of country. There was a fourth replacement company that basically handled the officers and senior NCOs, E7 and above, coming in country and also departing out of country. There was also a headquarters company that provided personnel that made up the various staff agencies within the battalion. You have any questions on that?
Yeah, if you so I just want to clarify that the one that you were assigned to was the E1 to E6 incoming.
Correct.
Okay. And your role there, you were the company commander?
I was the company commander. One of the things that we also were responsible because of need for a contingent of replacements, we kept 100-man 11 Bravo, which is the basic infantry MOS group of soldiers for about a week, 2 weeks, depending on arrivals. Basically, we kept them as a guard force, but their primary mission was in the event of a mass casualty of a unit, we could, in fact, within a very, very short period of time, move these 100 men in as instant replacements for infantry. They basically performed guard duty in and around the battalion area, just to keep them trained. And most of the time, these were lower ranking enlisted men, E1 through E4. And it was to indoctrinate them a little bit about how to guard things. Now, also because of the need for defense of the Cam Ranh Bay area, each unit that was there had a part of the defensive perimeter, which we also had to maintain, and I had to make sure that those defensive positions were organized properly and defended properly. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, thank you. So how you said you were there for 2 or 3 months, is that right, in that role?
I was there about maybe 2.5 months. And I really was overgrade for the assignment because I was on the promotion list to major, and so basically I got reassigned to Long Binh Post to the 29th General Support Group.
Got it. Well, during that 2.5 months, are there particular incidents that stand out in your memory as being surprising or eye-opening in some way? Any insights that you gained about just about people or about war as you executed your duties in that role?
There were two specific things that come to mind. The replacement battalion assignment was relatively secure. We were subject to being rocketed and so on. But I had to maintain a mess hall that was open 24/7. And basically it was rated as 100 or 1,000-man mess hall because the flights came at various times of the day. And so we had to feed these folks. In some cases, they hadn't eaten in some 11, 12 hours. So the mess operation ran, as I say, 24/7. One afternoon, actually in the morning, I was wandering through the company area, checking, making sure things were what they were supposed to be. I went into the mess hall and into the administrative area, and I noticed a typewriter sitting there with a piece of paper in it, and no one was around. I just happened to start reading the letter, and I determined that a young clerk for the mess hall was typing a letter to his parents, and he had written this horrible, letter about being attacked and uh, how bad things were and so on, which was not really the truth. I found a sticky note, stuck it on, and said, "Please come see me." So right after lunch, this young man reported in, and I said, "I'm glad to see you're writing your parents. However, you're not telling them the whole story and the truth. Uh, I want you to not write your parents those kinds of things because they're not happening. They're untruths. If I ever find out you're telling them these stories again, I will help get you reassigned within the hour to a location where this is going to be your day-to-day routine. Do we have an understanding?" He said, "Yes, sir." And to my knowledge, I think he quit writing those kinds of letters to his parents. The second incident that was a kind of eye-opening. I was in the orderly room in my office, and my first sergeant came in and he said, "There's two MPs that need to speak to you." So I said, "Send them in." And conversation basically was that they wanted to apprehend a young man who had allegedly robbed a bank off the post at Fort Lewis. And he had gone back to the post, uh, got on a plane, and was on the plane incoming as part of the replacements. They wanted to apprehend him at the plane, and I told them this was not a good idea, that it would be best if we brought him over to the company area. And our procedure was to have all the men line up, and then we would call them into the processing building one by one. And if they would be inside the door when this young man stepped in, then they could easily apprehend him without a whole lot of danger or anything to others that might be in the area. Uh, Basically, that's what happened. They apprehended him, put him in a Jeep, and took him right on back and put him on the same airplane in hand irons to go back to face bank robbery charges at Fort Lewis. I guess the young man thought he would be able to escape. However, when he robbed the bank, he did it in uniform with his name tag, and uh, it was pretty obvious who he was. And of course, they had him on camera. He just didn't really think through the whole situation, I guess. But those are two specific things I remember very vividly.
So this guy's he's sitting at Fort Lewis waiting to ship out to Vietnam.
Correct.
He goes
Correct.
he goes off post, robs a bank in uniform,
Yes.
goes back on post and gets in line to fly to Vietnam. And I mean, does he bring the money with him? Like, what happens to the money?
I have no idea because the EOPs confiscated him and his belongings.
Yeah, amazing. Well, so walk me through, let's say that I'm a young enlisted guy, and I land at Tan Son Nhut, and what's my experience? You said we all sort of wait and we get called into the processing building one at a time. What happens?
Okay, we're talking about Cam Ranh Bay, not Tan
Oh,
Son
sorry.
Nhut.
Correct. Yeah. Sorry about
Uh,
So I land at Cam Ranh Bay.
let me collect my thoughts for just a sec. Okay, the aircraft coming in basically were civilian aircraft. The majority of them were civilian aircraft, and they would come in. They would fuel sometimes in Japan, Guam, various places, but they only came in with a half a fuel load, primarily for safety reasons, because they could be attacked at any time on the ground, and they only wanted to spend minimum time on the ground. So when a flight landed, you're basically looking at about a 30-minute window maximum that aircraft was going to stay on the ground. As soon as it landed, it came to a standstill. Baggage was offloaded. Those that were on the plane that were incoming got off the plane. There was also a contingent of people who were returning back to stateside on their DEROs. And those folks their baggage would also be unloaded, plus they would be getting on the plane fairly quick. Those that were being, of course, offloaded would get on the buses that had brought those who were exiting the country, and they would be brought back to the 544th. That's the lower ranking enlisted. And we would form them up outside of our processing building. And then we would then move them into the building, and there were table and chairs for them to sit at and fill out various paperwork that would be collected, taken to our operations people, who then would check with U.S. Army Vietnam as to needs of military occupational skills, ranks, and so on, and gather assignments for these folks. And they would stay with us probably a minimum of 8 to 72 hours, depending upon on their military occupational skills and rank and needs, and trying to find them appropriate assignments. Then we would then transport them back, usually over to the air base, where they would catch either C-130s, 123s, or helicopters as need be to get them to their next units. We would offer, we had shower facilities, we had beds. Most of the time, they wanted to eat and take a shower and rest, and that kind of fit into our needs to give us enough time for USRV to find assignments or to tell us where they needed to go. And of course, that changed hourly based upon activities throughout Vietnam. And most of our people that arrived in Cam Ranh were going to go into uh, First and Second Corps, which was the two northern core areas of South Vietnam. If there was an assignment in Third and Fourth Corps, that normally would be filled by the 90th. Is basically the country was divided into two parts, as best I remember.
So your job is to, in a sense, to be sort of a matchmaker, right? You're getting, on the one hand, you're getting a list of needs, and on the other hand, you're sitting where the supply meets the demand.
Correct. Well, actually, the battalion operations people did that. My job was more like a hotel keeper. I provided a place for them to eat, sleep, rest, while assignments were being obtained. In the replacement company, but now the battalion's mission was to, as you just eloquently expressed, that's where the battalion would help get assignments for these folks.
I see. So you mentioned food, showers, and rest. For men who were there longer, for men whose stay with you was closer to the 72 hours side of things, was there any recreation available for them?
Yes, within my area of the battalion, there was a huge USO club staffed by civilian personnel. They had phones that you could call the States. They had all kinds of recreational things, ping pong, pool tables, basically anything, cards. They just a variety of things. There was also a detachment of donut dollies, Red Cross girls, who had a facility, and they also could provide recreational activities. But most of the people that used those were, to say, with us longer than 8 to 12 hours, because usually they were wore out from the flight, but still that opportunity was available to them. And of course, the use of the phones was very important. Of course, there was, as best I remember, maybe a 12-hour delay. So it might be 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it would be 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning in the United States. So sometimes parents and girlfriends and wives would be woken up in the middle of the night with a call, and of course that created a certain amount of panic. The battalion also had a chaplain, and we had a little chapel for those that felt the need. And of course, the chaplain ran various religious services for these young men incoming. There was also some other recreational things that became available through recreational services. As we were on the inlet of the Cam Ranh Bay, of course, we had a nice beach and sandy beach and so on, but therein created a problem in that there was a tremendous amount of waste being dumped into the bay by those units that were there. and sometimes we developed a little health hazard by swimming in the ocean. Um, so, and we also had a PX in our area, uh, which was an interesting thing. I don't know if anybody's talked to you about the ration cards and various things that were rationed.
No, not really. Go ahead.
Uh, every soldier entering the USRV was given a ration card, and you could buy so much. We call it Class 6 beverages, alcoholic beverages. So many bottles of alcohol in a month's time. There would be places for TVs and cameras, uh, which were in very, very short supply, but in high demand. And in order to buy, you had to have a place to be punched on your ration card. Now, that was another thing that as these folks came in, all that had to be taken care of to make sure they got their ration card on those that were incoming. Those that were leaving country on permanent assignment or reassignment, of course, their ration cards needed to be taken up and destroyed because otherwise they could be used for black market purposes. One thing I also failed to touch upon when I got into this PX thing, one of the things that had to be done with the incoming people is that all their U.S. currency had to be turned into military payment certificates, and that was another process that had to be ongoing. So we had a finance detachment attached to us, and they would do this conversion because U.S. dollars were forbidden to be used in Vietnam. Now, if you were leaving country for any reason, obviously you had to convert your military payment certificates back into U.S. currency. So those folks also played a role in the processing within the battalions.
What were some of the recurring issues that you had to manage that you just that it did? I'm not talking about isolated incidents. I'm talking about things that were recurring that you saw.
We had as I was telling you, we had this 100-man guard thing, and of course there would be problems. Somebody go to sleep on guard duty, various and sundry things, and so each morning you had to deal with those by determining whether non-judicial punishment, uh, Article 15s were necessary, or whether it just required a talking to. Uh, there were just a variety of things you had to do, normal things you would do in a regular unit. Uh, Somebody had to go through and make sure that uh, the shower room was in working order. If there was a plumbing issue, you had to make sure that it got fixed. Constant, of course, we had to issue uniforms to these folks coming in, issue them jungle fatigues and boots and various and sundry things that they needed immediately upon arrival. When you deal with with as many folks as we did during the day, I mean, they're just problems. Sometimes they just needed to talk to somebody. So you had to be available to be a listener. They were scared. You had to assure them that things were going to be all right. And, plus, you had your own cadre that you had to keep their morale up. But when you run basically 1,000 people a day through a facility, you've got to continually do maintenance, just wear and tear. So, it was not a matter of just sitting there all day twiddling your thumbs. You had things that had to be taken care of.
Yeah. So a thousand a day was about the rate of flow for you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Because anyway, I mean, you might get 3 flights today. You might get 9 flights tomorrow. Now, the operations people, of course, would get enough notice that they knew what was incoming. And of course, that dictated how many got sent home, that we could process that many seats for people to return back to the United States.
You said that, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, you said that every once in a while you'd have to reassure somebody. I mean, that soldier's on his way into the theater of war. How do you do that? How do you reassure somebody?
You just sit down and try to get them to start a conversation and just try to explain to them that they're there for a purpose. Just reinforce things that they have been taught in their training. Everyone's different. You just had to be a good listener and try to give them reassurance as best you could that it would all work out. That was not necessarily the case, but you had to get them through that particular few moments. There was a lot of apprehension. They had heard so many horror stories in training, and most of the time these kids came in, particularly the E1s, E2s, E3s. They didn't know what to expect, and you just tried to do your best to assure them that things were going to work out. It was a tough job, but it had to be done. The main thing is, keep them busy. Busy mind keeps the devil away.
Right, right. You mentioned earlier about sort of Hollywood moments, right? Things that may be emblematic, but aren't necessarily 100% accurate. One of the things that I was thinking about when we were brainstorming this idea of doing an episode about replacement companies, I kept coming back to the moment in Platoon, the movie Platoon, where Charlie Sheen's character, having been through everything that he endured, is on his way out, and he sees the fresh-faced, inexperienced replacements coming in, and they walk past each other, and their eyes meet, right? And you're just imagining that sort of unspoken exchange, right? the guys on the way in seeing the guys on the way out, and vice versa, and how much they communicate to each other just with their eyes. But talking to you, I realize now that those were two separate companies, right? The company that processed guys coming in was separate from the company that processed.
Yeah, they were removed from. In fact, they were kind of on the other side of the battalion area.
I imagine that was probably by design.
I would hope so. But there again, as you say, for the sake of movie, the drama, the theater, but some of that did occur out in the units as the new guys came in. And that's one of the things that, of course, as I say, when I deployed on my first tour, we went as a unit. Everybody knew everybody. But by November, December, there had been enough casualties or people who term of service was over, and we were starting to get those individual replacements. The older guys tended to fear, is this guy going to hold up? I used to know Joe. We've been together 2 years. I know what he's going to do, or I think I know what he's going to do. I don't know about this new guy. Can I trust him? So there were trust issues, and yeah, for the drama of the movie, maybe it was a little more theatrical, but I believe some of that did in fact exist until their first engagement, be it a breakdown of a vehicle, and the kid who's the mechanic jumps in and actually knows what he's doing. Oh, okay, he's acceptable. I'll trust him. But yes, there are trust issues with these individual replacements coming in. In gaining that trust, oftentimes took days or weeks. But you got to watch out for the new guy. He doesn't know. So yes, there was a certain amount of that, but not always the drama that you saw, as you say, in Platoon.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ray, is there anything that we haven't talked about? Anything I failed to ask you that you think I should have?
Well, I think our original thing was to talk about replacement operations and so on. And I can, if you want, I can talk a little bit about my job as the adjutant of the 29th Group, where we would get replacements for our various maintenance and supplies units. We would get a call from Saigon Support Command that we had folks come pick them up. And of course, I'd have to send a Jeep and a driver to pick them up and bring them back to the group headquarters. And then I would have to look and see who had the greatest need for this particular MOS or rank and so on. And of course, I pretty much handled all the enlisted that came into the group headquarters. Now, my immediate boss, who was the S1, pretty much massaged the officer assignments, although I did make recommendations to him. But oftentimes we would get these young folks and they would come in and, they tell me their story or whatever. And I try to tell them that we had a need say at Tay Ninh, not at Long Bend, but they were going to go to Tay Ninh, and that was that. One particular incident, I had a young man who came in, and much to my surprise, he shows up with this female Vietnamese. And he proceeds to tell me he has to be assigned to Long Bend. And I said, no, I don't have need for you at Long Bend. I need you somewhere else. Oh, no, you don't understand. Yes, I understand. And the story was, this is my wife, and she's from this area, Benoit, and we want to be there. And I'm thinking, this is not good. I don't know how all this is occurring, how she basically got on Long Bend Post and so on and so on. I excuse me, talked to my boss, the major, and I said, not real happy with this, and da da da. Well, let's go ahead and sign him here to a unit at Long Bend. So I called the adjutant of that maintenance battalion that we were going to send him to, and kind of told him what the deal was, and so on and so on. He went on down and began to process and so on, and that was kind of out of sight, out of mind. The next morning, this young man was also reported as being AWOL, and apparently he had left the installation, left Long Bend Post, and went into wherever the wife was from, and he became one of our missing people. I don't know what happened to him to this date, but she was a local girl and apparently wanted back. He volunteered to come back for a second tour, and of course they went off the installation. So that was another interesting incident.
Your time with as the company commander there, you said you were only there for a couple of months because you were
Right.
Ready for promotion, and we're only talking about 2 or 2.5 months out of a long military career. But is there anything about that time that stuck with you for the rest of your military career? Did it change you in any way or inform your approach to your career?
Oh, of course, every assignment you learn something new. Learning tact and diplomacy was an ongoing situation for every day you're on active duty. And that also plays off into the civilian side. And I'm extremely grateful and thankful for some of the lessons that I have learned through my military experience. And you just learn to see things up close and personal. I, I don't know if that kind of answers your question or not, but I have talked to folks I went to high school with, and they just have never seemed to have grown intellectually. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but they just don't understand sometimes what's going on in the world around them. And, it's a vision that you see, having been in places not friendly. Not everybody likes you. You learn to adapt. I don't know if it's what you're really trying to pinpoint or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really trying to pinpoint anything. I'm just trying to ask good questions and give you a chance to share your perspective. And I think you've done that.
I probably one of the most, when you look back over things over that period, the assignment in Detroit in processing as many people we did every day for entry into the armed forces. We're talking about the tail end of the draft. Of all my assignments, that was probably the most challenging, and the most educational. I my title was Joint Processing Officer, and we processed for all four branches and any federal agency that wanted us to process, plus the Selective Service. And in the tail end of the draft, I administered contracts for feeding and housing and transportation. We were the second, the Armed Forces Examining Interstate, we were the second largest user of American Airlines in the city of Detroit because of the sending these young soldiers to various locations throughout the United States. And the responsibility of housing and feeding that many people every day, I learned the power of federal judges in dealing with the U.S. Attorney's Office on draft evaders and just routine day in and day out operations. The administering of these contracts, the responsibility, it was probably a equivalent of getting a doctoral degree in human relations. As we put people into the service, that particular night, we had to transmit data to enter them in to the data processing systems of the various services. Very rudimentary now compared to laptop computers and so on, but everything was put on a punch tape, paper tape, using basically 9 places in the tape. Just blows your mind as to how far we've come. But that again was another experience. I had to deal with labor negotiations in Detroit because our preponderance of our workforce was civilian, and Detroit being a union town, they had a union. And I had to learn a little bit about federal unions and the negotiation of labor contracts. So, yeah, I got quite a broad brush of a lot of different things in my time on active duty. I don't know if you've ever had anybody that you've talked to in that aspect. And we're talking, I was there 70 to 73. And of course, the anti military attitude of towards the military by the local people. We did not allow our lower ranking enlisted wear their uniforms to and from work for fear that they would be injured or hurt. And
Say
that
that
might be,
last, sorry, say that last bit again.
I said, we did not allow our lower ranking enlisted to wear uniforms to and from work because of fear that they would be hurt or injured by uh, the people in the area.
Wow.
I don't know. That was another interesting, to say, experience dealing with all that.
Well, Ray, what did you do after you ended your military career?
Look for a job. I had obtained a master's degree in management supervision from Central Michigan University right before I got out. I couldn't law a job. Eventually, I wound up in the insurance business. I did property and casualty and life and health. Did not like that, but I'd always had an interest in photography from the time I was 10 years old. And while I was in college, I worked for a portrait photographer in Richmond, Kentucky. So about 1991, I needed some advertising, and the local paper needed somebody to do their darkroom work. And we started trading services. By 1996, I got out of the insurance business and became a full-time photographer. And I've now about give that up. I'm trying to retire.
Yeah. And just remind me where you're living now.
I'm in Middlesboro, Kentucky. We're down in the southeast corner of the state. Well, I'm about 3 miles from Cumberland Gap, where Daniel Boone came into Kentucky on the way to Boonesboro.
Middlesboro. You said that's where you're the woman you married. That's where she was from.
We came back here temporarily after I got off active duty, and still here temporarily.
Right. Well, we're all here temporarily. So same girl your whole life?
Yep. She put up with a lot.
Yeah.
She was a good mother. She raised 3 kids.
You and I have so much in common, Ray. I'm also an only child, and I also have 3 kids. I've also spent time in Kentucky, and as I told you, my father was at Aberdeen Proving Ground. So it's strange because we're a few generations apart from each other, but
Yeah.
covered a lot of the same ground.
Well, I mean,
Also, I was born in Germany in Mannheim, so
Oh, okay.
In Frankfurt, so we have that in common.
Well, Frankfurt, it's quite a city. That was an interesting assignment.
Yeah.
I got to go to Berlin before the wall came down, and that was quite an eye-opening experience to see the wall and the Russians and all that business. And you know, seeing the wall come down was pretty interesting and thrilling to see that all occur.
Yeah, I was there the following summer. I think it came down in October or November of '89, and I was there in June of '90. Of course, all my family over there is, Western.
Right.
I had no connection with East Germany at all. But by the time I got there, several of them had visited Berlin. One of them gave me a piece of the wall.
Oh, cool.
I still have around here somewhere. And then later in life, I did actually get over to Berlin myself. But of course, that was 20 or 30 years, 20 years after the wall came down.
Yeah, by that time, I mean, you didn't have to worry about certain stops that you couldn't get off at.
Yeah.
And,
right.
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting experience. There's a retired first sergeant who was assigned to the Berlin Brigade, and he's now the principal to middle school here. And it's kind of interesting talking to him and his experiences there and so on. And I've talked to some people who did have assignments in the Berlin Brigade, and it was kind of interesting talking to them. Of course, Berlin now is totally different. And,
yeah. But it's fun to, you can still see some of the old, at least when I was there, this is probably 10 years ago now, you could still see some of the old, you can see the difference in architecture.
Oh yeah. I came across some pictures the other day of Checkpoint Charlie. And I remember seeing that and looking across, and anyway, fascinating. Just when I was in Europe, I was taking the Command and General Staff course, and we'd meet once a week, and then in the summer we had to go for a 2-week deal in Munich. That was always hard duty. Get 2 weeks TDY to Munich. Class was from 8 to 4, had an hour for lunch, and just being able to wander around Munich and see some of that stuff. And of course, being an art major, I got to see some of the major art museums there, and just was amazed at seeing those paintings and stuff that I'd seen in books, and just blows my mind. So, but now that's all. It's probably a hell of a lot different now than it was then. It brings up another. One day, close to St. Patrick's Day, a couple of those gals, Red Cross gals, came in and wanted to have a meeting and with me, and I asked them what the deal was, and it was close to St. Patrick's Day, and they wanted me to get them a bunch of green paint. And I said, "What are you going to do with green paint?" And they said they wanted to paint the road green and have a St. Patrick's Day parade. And I said, that ain't going to happen because it's so sandy here. They had street sweepers constantly running over the roads trying to keep the sand off the streets, a traffic hazard.
Mm-hmm.
And I explained to him I wasn't going to get them any green paint the road because that was a lost cause. The way the sand was constantly blowing on the road,